This is WAPE Channel 69 and The Honest John Show.
And The Honest John Show.
Hello again, this is Honest John. Glad you're back at this YouTube site celebrating the Big Ape in Jacksonville. This is going to be another talkie. We're going to talk about radio a little bit and programming and how things have changed. And I've got a couple of stories for you that I hope you enjoy. I don't have any audio except for one long piece that I'm trying to put together, but it's going to take some time. And that might be a wintertime project when it's cold outside, but it's a warm, beautiful day now. For the record, I'm recording this on July 30th, 2024 from my home in North Carolina. Let's talk about radio generally in broad terms. When I started in radio, most radio stations were just small town, locally owned businesses. A group of people got together and said the town needs a radio station, and they put up the money and put one up. When you do that, you apply to the FCC for a license, and you have to do a lot of engineering work ahead of time, tell them what you're going to do and what's going to happen when you push the button, because they controlled everything pretty closely back in those days, especially with AM radio and at night. A lot of AM radio stations sign off at night. Others have to reduce power or change the pattern that they broadcast or some combination of those, because otherwise at night, after the sun goes down, the atmosphere tends to stabilize. There's no longer hot spots and cooler spots. It tends to stabilize, and those layers of air tend to skip AM radio signals a long, long way. So if you just let every AM stay on at night, you wouldn't be able to hear anything. So when you come in, you have to tell what stations are close to your frequency and how you're going to protect them, and all those kinds of things to the FCC. Another consideration is at that time the FCC had what they call clear channel radio stations. There were several of these all over the United States, and the FCC designated them specially clear channel. They protected the channel so there wouldn't be any other radio stations on it for any particular frequency, so that they could be heard all over the country at night in case of a national emergency. And that's what it was all about. That has gone away now, I think. But at those times, back in those days, the best radio, rock and roll radio, or any kind of radio was at night, because those big 50,000 watt AM stations could broadcast all over the place, and they attracted the best DJs. In my home from High Point, North Carolina, ride around the car, I could hear Cousin Brucey at WABC New York. I could hear John R. WLS and WLAC in Nashville. I could hear Chicago. I could hear Detroit. I could hear Charlotte and New Orleans, and radio stations everywhere. And it was wonderful, especially starting out in radio, because I got to listen to all these really good guys. But that was one of the things. Ownership was local. A station was licensed to a town. It had to do quite a bit of public service for the town. Had to do a certain amount of news, and you promise the FCC you're going to do this, and they come and check and make sure you do it. They also come and put instruments to listen to your station and make sure you're still on frequency and the power's correct and all that. And we had to keep constant FCC logs of the transmitters, all the voltages and wattages and those kinds of things that could be inspected at any time, and were. That was one of the things. And of course, the station was licensed for a town, and so mostly the station served that town and the businesses in that town, and tried to play music for the people in that town. And it was very different from now, because in those days a lot of stations were block programmed. They'd have news blocks in the morning, and then they would play music for housewives or whatever they could come up with. Then they'd have another news block at noon, and then in the afternoon more light music until school let out, and then they would be rock and roll for a while. That's just the way they were, and they were sold in that way. They were programmed in that way, and they served a community. Nowadays, that was primarily because in those days the FCC simply would not let any one legal entity, person, corporation, whatever, own more than one radio station in a town, plus one television station, plus I think maybe one newspaper. But nowadays it's completely different because all those limits are off. Nowadays, one corporation or company can, and it can be a multinational company, can own, I guess, as many radio, TV stations, and newspapers as they want. In the old days, you go in a radio station, you were met by a receptionist who would go to get the disc jockey, and you could talk to him, and it's like that. Now you're going to walk into a corporate headquarters. There are lots of stations. There's lots of studios around, radio and television. There's big satellite dishes outside, and it's a whole different thing. Because now, with all these radio stations at their disposal, the salespeople will go to a business and say, "Who do you want to reach?" And they say, "Well, we want to sell BMWs." And the station says, "Okay, we know who buys those, and we've got this here, this here, this here, and this here, and we can give you a little bit of all of that, and you can focus more on the audience that you want," which is a good thing for sales, I guess, for businesses, but it splatters the concentration, the focus of the station over a whole wide area. Plus, this is a little complicated. Now when I started in radio, just an example. When I started in radio, I worked weekend shifts at WGWR in Asheboro, North Carolina, small town, small station. I ran rock and roll on Saturday nights, and then on Sunday nights, Belinda and I would come in and we'd play Ella Fitzgerald and the Ray Conniff Singers and those kinds of, and Sinatra and those kinds of things. But that was where I got my start in radio, and it was a good place to do it. But the station programmed to Asheboro. Now, Asheboro is a part of what is called the Piedmont Triad Market, and that includes Greensboro and Winston-Salem and High Point, along with Asheboro and Kernersville and Lexington and all these other little towns around here. So it makes it difficult for small-town radio to continue to exist. A lot of those stations have been bought up, and just the call letters changed, and they become part of a corporate marketing focus. So that's a big change in radio. I mentioned some of the technical changes. Radio stations have to protect each other, and they can do that by signing off the air, reducing their power, or AM stations can focus their power in a certain way. If they've got more than one tower, they can program those so that the ones on the sides sort of blank out the signal, and it can be focused over a given area. The Big Ape in Jacksonville was 50,000 watts daytime AM in all directions. We were blocked to the south by Radio Havana somewhat, but we went way all the way north up to Cape Hatteras. The AM at night, however, was directional. It broadcast from a transmitter in Baldwin, and it pretty much went directly north, directly out over Jacksonville to cover the market. So that was that. Let me see, is there anything else? Of course, the growth of FM changed everything. FM does not travel as far as AM, especially at night when AM can start bouncing signals off of layers of atmosphere. So they are far less regulated. You can have an FM on 94.5 in one town, and you can have another one at 94.5 in a town 100 miles away, and they're not going to bother each other. Okay. couple of stories. One of them involves when I left the Big Ape in Jacksonville, I had planned to go to Daytona. I had a job offer in Daytona at a rock and roll station, and it would have been a pretty good job, and I was looking forward to that. But I had a contract with Sis Radio, the company that bought the Big Ape from the Brennan family, and that contract, one of the provisions of the contract was that I could not work within 100 miles of Jacksonville for a year. It turned out that the main post office in Jacksonville was about 94.7 miles from the main post office in Daytona, so I couldn't go to Daytona. I went down to Delray Beach and got a job with Vic Knight down there. Vic owned a couple of radio stations, one there, one in Gainesville, and he was negotiating to buy an AM and an FM in Daytona, and he thought that was probably going to take about a year, and he said, you come to work for me and run the morning show down here, and when I get the stations in Daytona, I'll move you up there and you can program the AM as a rock station, and we'll do the FM as jazz and classical. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I went to work for him in Delray Beach. It was a nice little station, a small town station, but it was part of I guess it's the Gold Coast of Florida. We sent a really good signal into West Palm on one side and Fort Lauderdale on the other, so we were part of that block of markets along there. And we also sent a nice signal over to the Bahamas, and that relates to this story. I was on the air one morning. It was before sunrise. Nobody in the station except me and the news person, and he was busy, so I had to answer the phones, which is no problem. Picked up the phone, and I heard a drunken Irishman. He was babbling something, but there was somebody else with him, also a drunken Irishman, trying to take the phone away, and they were arguing. And finally, I got them settled down enough, and the guy who made the call said, "This is Richard Harris, the actor. Do you know who I am?" And I said, "Well, of course I know who you are." And the other guy over there was saying stuff like, "He's not an actor. There's only one actor here, and that's me." And at that point, Richard Harris said, "That's Peter O'Toole. He's my friend." And we're over here, and O'Toole was going, "I'm not your damn friend." But he said, "We're over here sitting in the Bahamas, sitting by the pool, waiting for the sunrise." And O'Toole says he's never heard my record of MacArthur Park. Don't you think he ought to hear it? And O'Toole was yelling, "You can't even act, much less sing," stuff like that. And they were grabbing at the phone and everything. But I said, "Oh, sure, it's a great song, I'll play it." And he said, "Thank you very much." And they hung up, and so did I. So I played the record for Richard Harris. That's my Richard Harris, Peter O'Toole song. We enjoyed living in South Florida for a while. Tracy and Belinda and I, it's a different kind of place down there, very crowded, but we enjoyed it. Another story, this involves racing. I went in the station one morning. This was the Big Ape, and Jim Shyro was standing there, and he had an envelope in his hand, and he said, "Honest, we got a request to do a public appearance for a fundraiser for somebody who got hurt or has cancer or something. They're going to do it at a racetrack, and they want somebody to drive a race car. Would you want to do that?" And I said, "Well, hell yeah, I want to do that," because see what he didn't realize was that I was raised on a farm here in Randolph County, North Carolina, and I got my driver's license in 1958. Mom and Dad had a 57 Ford Fairlane 500, green over white, with the small V8 and automatic, but I learned to drift in that thing. I learned how to drive on dirt, We had dirt and gravel and dust everywhere, and so I was ready. I thought I could do okay. The idea was that Tiny Lund, the race driver, came out of Iowa, I believe. He was sort of a freelance driver. He won the Daytona 500 in 1963, I believe, and I think he was killed in 1975 in an accident in Talladega. But he was a respected driver, certainly to be reckoned with. And the idea was he was going to start at the back and let all these wussy celebrities get started in front of him. And we were all going to be driving cars that were loaned to us by local drivers. And I went there, they assigned me I think it was a 56 Chevy. And the driver was beside the car. He said, it's just a straight transmission and it's all, and I knew how to do all that. He handed me his helmet. His helmet fit, and I got in the car, and his car didn't fit at all because, I'm pushing 5'8". This guy was like 6'2" or 3, and the car was set up for him. So it was quickly obvious that, I could either reach the pedals or see out of the windshield, but not both at the same time. And if I wanted to look out in the rearview mirror, which seemed kind of important, to know what's going on back there, I had to scooch way back and push up in the seat and then flop back down and try to reach the pedals again. So it was like that. And also there was a big hole in the floorboard just to the left of the clutch, so that every time you went into a left turn, and they were all left turns, and it was a dirt track, I got a face full of mud and dirt. And so those were the driving conditions. But I knew what I was doing. When they dropped the flag, I got out front. I got way out in front because I was drifting the curve. Man, I was hot stuff around there. And I kept scooching back and looking in the rearview mirror, and everybody else was way back in the back. So I was just hauling ass, and driving as fast as I could, enjoying the curves. And I kept scooching up in the back, and I kept seeing these two headlights just get closer and closer and closer every lap. And finally, I looked in the rearview mirror, squinched up, and all I could see was headlights. The next curve, I felt a bump on the rear bumper, and I went spinning off the track. Tiny Lund went around me. But I got started, and I came in second, which was nice. We all got on the, one thing I remember about that especially is we all got on the podium, Tiny Lund, and then there was first and second and third. I was second. And there was a pretty big crowd there. And when they announced Tiny's name as the winner, everybody went, yay! The crowd erupted. And I've since then, every time I see that happen to a rock and roll star or an athlete, I sort of know how that feels, even though the applause was not for me. Real short here, another little basically sort of racing story is, it involves Blue Eyes. Second time I was in Daytona, we had a guy on the staff who was a really good race broadcaster. As a matter of fact, he helped out with some of the network broadcast. And so we did some local races that were not broadcast on the network during Speed Week. And we'd go to the track, and he'd call the races, but I would help a little bit, by getting information and things like that, car numbers and such. And we were sort of getting ready to do one afternoon. And by the way, that week, during Speed Weeks, that whole month, I got to drive this vehicle. This is the Budweiser van. That's my daughter Tracy standing out in front of it. But it was a cool vehicle to drive. But the best thing about it was when I was in that vehicle, I had complete, free, total, anytime I wanted to go, access to the infield at the Daytona International Speedway. And so Tracy and I would go in and out and watch all kinds of races, saw the 24 hours, and it was just fun. But anyway, I was up in the press booth getting ready to do a little broadcast. And the press booth at the Daytona International Speedway at that time was very elaborate. I'm sure it's probably even more so now. But the whole front of the long room was glass. I think the glass was angled out at the top so you could see down. It was overlooking the pit road. And I was up there just looking out the window, and I looked down, and Paul Newman was standing there at his car, and he was talking to another guy. He had on his sunglasses, and they just stood there and talked for a few minutes. And all of a sudden, he took off his sunglasses and looked up at the sun, and all I could see was blue eyes. The only eyes that were that blue were Ringo Starr's when we went to the press conference in Washington. So that's my blue-eyed story. And my Budweiser van. I really enjoyed that Budweiser. So did the whole family. I want to talk about, for just a minute here, about the name Honest John. I get people ask about it. And I got that from a guy named Honest John. I think his name was John Stanton. He worked at WTOB in Winston-Salem. When I started in radio, and I mentioned before, I listened at night when I could to the big Clear Channel giants because those guys knew what they were doing, and they were all really good, and I learned a lot from them. During the day, I listened quite a bit to WTOB in Winston-Salem. It was a rock and roll station, and it was the best medium-sized market rock and roll station I've ever heard in my life. At that time, they had a crew of disc jockeys who were all clever and funny and knew what they were talking about. They were very professional. They were very different, but they sort of fit together, and they had good production values and good jingles, and I was really a fan of WTOB. And also to Honest John Stanton. So when I moved away from out of the range of WTOB, I just picked up Honest John. My last name's Faree, which is difficult, and it just seemed natural for me, and it was easy, and I never thought it was anything but it just worked, so I used it. I also used my last name some. I wasn't comfortable changing my name, and I don't know why, but I wasn't. As a matter of fact, most of the people, the survivors, who I worked with in radio over the years call me Honest. And my friends around here just call me John because they don't... This disc jockey thing is just completely alien to them because they have this cliche notion of what a rock and roll disc jockey was. And it ain't me, you know. They think of a rock and roll disc jockey, especially in the 60s, as drug, sex, and rock and roll, man, you know, and party hard and all of that stuff. And I don't fit in that. I never did. I never was too much into drugs. I never had a lot of luck with them, especially on the radio. And I was steeped in rock and roll. I was right in the middle of that whole thing, of course. And as for sex, well, it was not a problem at all because I was married to Belinda. And, you know, I don't like to brag, but we had a really, really, really good time. Which brings me to a bit of sad news. I lost her a week ago today. She finally died, and it was a good thing because she had suffered so much, and her suffering was just agony to watch, and it went on for a long, long time. But she's gone now, and I'm learning how to do whatever the hell happens next here. But I hope it's fun. I don't mean to end this on such a downer, but Belinda and I were married for 61 years. We've been together. We were together for 6 years before that, since she was a freshman in high school and I was a junior. And we lived a very, very good life, and we had a really, really good time. And I am really going to miss her. So I'll be back here as soon as I come up with something else that I think you might be interested in. Until then, if you've got any audio of any of the Big Ape disc jockeys, please just get in touch with me. The email is up here, and we'll work it out. And I'll see you back when I can. Until then, take good care of yourself, and I hope you have a wonderful life.
WAPE Channel 69.